build the gun, it had to be broken down into roughly 25 main components. The boiler started with constructing 4 parallel railroad tracks. 2 central tracks were for the gun itself, and 2 outer tracks allowed the gantry cranes manufactured by Ardelt Werke to lift and place the major components in place. The sleepers under all 4 tracks were closely spaced and reinforced by iron grids to help absorb the massive recoil when the gun fired. The assembly followed a specific sequence and required around 250 people working at the same time. First, the left and right chassis halves were assembled on 4 5-axle bogies each. This meant the gun moved on 40 axles, or 80 wheels. Once completed, the central connection and mounting piece were installed between the chassis. Then, the gun cradle was fitted onto the mounting. The gun cradle was carried on 2 trunnions positioned between 2 upper carriage beams. After that, a jacket tube for barrel support was set into the cradle, ready to accommodate the barrel. The barrel consisted of 2 main sections, joined by a giant threaded coupling nut in the middle. The rear half of the barrel was encased in the jacket tube. 4 recoil cylinders were arranged in 2 pairs around the cradle to help spread the massive recoil force and reduce the strain in the carriage. Finally, the breech block was moved into place and installed. At the rear, a loading platform was integrated into the carriage. It featured 2 hoists to lift shells and charges, a self-contained power unit to drive all the servicing mechanisms, and a central loading tray that was equipped with a powered rammer. The gun was powered by an onboard diesel-electric generator. To slow the 1,350-ton weapon, railcar handbrakes were installed on the forward end. At the front bogies, massive jack pads were installed on the carriage. These were lowered before firing to transfer the recoil force directly into the ground and reduce stress on the wheel axles. The jack pads also prevented the gun from horizontal movement during firing. The huge gun fired 2 primary types of shells. The high-explosive shell, or Sprenggranaten, was the lighter of the 2, including all charges. The complete assembly measured 27 feet and 1 inch long, around the length of a classic London double-decker bus. The shell itself was 11 feet and 4 inches long and weighed 10,600 pounds. The shell had a steel body. A ballistic cap made from Solumen, an aluminum alloy, was mounted at the nose of the shell. The cap provided better aerodynamics, reduced drag, and allowed the shell to fly further. The cap covered the nose fuse at the upper part of the shell. To reduce the risk of a dud shot, a second fuse was added to the base of the shell. The explosive charge consisted of pieces of hexogen and nitroguanidine. The explosive charge weighed approximately 882 pounds. The hexogen was laid around the fuse so that when the fuse detonated, the hexogen exploded first. This triggered the nitroguanidine, which was less sensitive to shock and needed the hexogen to detonate reliably. 3 pairs of driving bands were made from sintered iron and wrapped around the shell, with a single soft iron sealing ring positioned behind them. The bands gripped the rifling or spiral grooves inside the barrel, making the shell spin as it accelerated forward. They also sealed the pellet discs behind the shell. With the maximum power charge, the shell reached a muzzle velocity of around 2,700 feet per second. shell, but had a concealed hardened point beneath the ballistic cap. Unlike the explosive shell, it only had a single fuse in the base. This kept the nose structure intact for better penetration of concrete and armor. The explosive content was approximately 441 pounds. Like the high explosive shell, it used hexogen and nitroguanidine, but in smaller amounts. The armor-piercing shell had thicker walls, which left less room inside for explosives. With the maximum powder charge, the shell reached a muzzle velocity of around 2,400 feet per second and a maximum range of approximately 23.6 miles. Test results showed that the shell could penetrate 33 feet of concrete, around 3.3 feet of armor plate, or 23 feet of reinforced concrete. The gun was designed for long-range siege, not direct fire. Both shells had enough range to shoot across the Strait of Gibraltar. They were fired with a propellant charge of good old smokeless powder. The main charge weighed 2,028 pounds and was placed in a steel or brass casing, armed with a percussion primer. Up to 2 additional bagged charges could be added, bringing the total powder load to around 4,080 pounds for armor-piercing shells and around 4,387 pounds for high-explosive shells. The gun could fire at angles from roughly 45 degrees up to 65 degrees. For each shot, the crew lowered the barrel down to a near horizontal position of around 10 degrees or less. This allowed the crew to access the breech and load the gun safely. To aim the gun left or right, there was no turret to rotate. Instead, the entire weapon sat on a curved section of track. 2 diesel-electric locomotives pushed and pulled the gun back and forth along this curve until the barrel pointed at the target. Once the gun was close to its intended position, electric motors on some of the axles made small adjustments. When the gun wasn't moving, the locomotives could also supply electrical power to the weapon. The crew positioned the gun with precision down to about 0.4 inches along the rails. This let them line up the barrel exactly where the firing calculations said it needed to be. The shell and propellant components were hoisted from ammunition cars on the rear tracks up to the loading platform by 2 lifts. The shell was rolled onto the central loading tray and pushed into the chamber by the powered rammer. The bagged charges came next, followed by the cartridge case holding the main charge. This sealed the breech and provided the ignition. Once everything was loaded, the breech was closed and locked. The crew raised the barrel to the firing angle, while the ammunition cars moved away from behind the gun. Then the crew withdrew to covered positions at least several hundred meters from the gun before firing. Once the fire command was given, the firing mechanism was activated remotely. An electrical striker hit the primer in the bottom of the casing and ignited the charge. When the gun fired, the blast was immense. The shockwave shattered windows and buildings several kilometers away. The sound was so loud that it could be heard 22 miles away. Soviet partisans in the surrounding hills thought the Germans were conducting excavation work with explosives. They didn't realize the sound was artillery fire. Once the gun had fired, the crew returned to the gun and the barrel was lowered back to the loading position. The breech was opened and the spent case was pulled out and sent back down the line. Observers in a tethered balloon several kilometers from the gun would watch to see where each shell landed. They would then communicate with the gun crew, allowing them to adjust the gun's aim. Under ideal conditions with a well-drilled crew, The rate of fire was about one shot every 19 minutes. In real combat conditions, though, the practical interval stretched to as long as 45 minutes between rounds. Dora's busiest day saw only 16 rounds fired, despite the massive manpower and logistics involved. This was far from the theoretical maximum rate of fire. Equal damage to the rail bed and firing curves meant the gun sometimes had enforced pauses of days between shoots. Sometimes the force of the shot compacted the ground beneath the rails by 2 to 3 inches, setting the rails lower and requiring realignment before the next firing. Dora was notably used in combat during the German siege of Sevastopol in Crimea on June 1942. One of its targets was the underground ammunition depot at Sukharnaya Balka, designated Weisseklippen or White Cliffs by the Germans. When correctly matched to a target, the destructive effect was extreme. One round wrecked the pier and entrance, collapsed the overlying ground, destroyed nearby structures, and even capsized a small steamer anchored not far from the blast. Accuracy suffered badly due to barrel wear. After inspection of the worn barrel, the original life estimate of around 300 rounds was revised to just 100 rounds. The gun was extremely expensive, costing approximately 10 million Reichsmarks, equivalent to the cost of 250 15-centimeter heavy field howitzers, 40 Tiger I tanks, or nearly 2,000 B-1 flying bombs. While technically impressive, the gun was operationally inefficient. It was slow to deploy and fire, and required huge manpower for a low shot rate and an even lower rate of on-target hits. In Sevastopol, only 10 rounds landed within 225 feet of the target. Besides, it was an impossible task to move 5 trains and spend 6 weeks in preparation unnoticed by the Allies. The gun was designed for a type of warfare that no longer existed by the time it became operational. Dora was dismantled and never recovered intact. Components were scattered and scrapped after the war.
Yo, I have never been heckled by signs before. This is crazy. I like this shit. Hell yeah, step up. You. Talk to me, you mother. How do we do this? You get there. What? You can't see him? They can't hear me. What's your name, man? Dang, this show's gonna take another hour. All right. Sir, how are you, man? If you do it, all right. What do you want to talk about? All right. Sir, how are you, man? If you do it, all right. What do you want to talk about? You gotta do it with your hand. What does that mean? Like pottery? Oh my God! You like dude hands or woman hands? Pick me up with JJ's. Yeah, I got it. Does he want a son or does he plus? Yo, this mother that guy played defensive line for the Cowboys, bro. What his favorite part about being a deaf man is? I can't hear you. Yo, I have never been heckled by signs before. This is great. To me, you mother. How do we do this? You get there. What? You can't see him? They can't hear me.
Their pilots are on a bombing mission in violation of a NATO no-fly zone. The leader of the flight is pilot Branko Vukmirovic, radar height, but now, with the target getting close, they're forced to ascend to 2,000 meters to start the attack run on a weapons factory. In doing so, the aging Serbian jets light up the watching NATO radars. 50 miles away, two patrolling F-16s are informed of the J-21's presence.
Black flag, you have 6 bogeys. We have AA-320 for 52 at 7,000. Flanking, copy that.
The F-16s bank towards the target. In an attempt to shorten the war, NATO has set up a no-fly zone, and the F-16s have been sent on a route to intercept. Vukmirovic gets a visual on his target and arms his bombs. The flight positions themselves in pairs, one after the other, when suddenly a transmission comes through the radio. A pit grows in Vukmirovic's stomach. He can clearly see the trails of the two American Air Force jets dead ahead of them. He takes a deep breath. In previous missions, the American jets have only watched and warned the enemy, but not engaged. Vukmirovic knows if the F-16s had wanted to shoot him, they could have done so from miles away. But his eyes go wide as he sees the two F-16s approach at breakneck speed and roar through and past the Bosnian Serb flag.
Jesus, did you see those old U-boats?
Despite the show of force, the Serbian pilots are not distracted and keep their eyes on their objective. The Yastrebs are old tech and still use optical sights, and as the target drifts into the crosshairs, the aging planes release and drop their rudimentary but effective 550-pound bombs on target, striking them from different directions.
They dropped bombs. Understood. You're clear to engage. Weapons free. Roger, looking to engage. Enemy shooting fish in a barrel.
At the very rear of the formation, pilot Zlatan Zirnovic watches the last of the bombers strike. The 6 J-21s turn back towards their airbase, but their speed is no match for the F-16s, who sweep in behind them, lining up their sights on the very rear of the formation. The pilot switches to air-to-air mode and selects an AIM-120 missile on his right display computer. On his head-up display, a box designates the target. The F-16 pilot gets a look and presses the weapons release button. The missile flies off from the range. The AIM-120 AMRAAM radar-guided missile fires and locks onto the running J-21's radar signature, rapidly approaching its target. Zirnovic is scanning the skies for the Americans when he sees an enormous flash. He wonders if he's been hit, but then he sees the explosion on his wingman's left wing, immediately shredding half of it off. The 5 remaining J-21s turn over and dive for the ground. One of the F-16s gives chase, following it all the way down into the valleys between the Bosnian hills. Each pair of J-21s goes its own way, leaving Zirnovic completely on his own. He frantically looks over his shoulder as he flies through the terrain, catching the terrifying sight of an American fighter hot on his heels. The F-16 fires an AIM-9 Sidewinder heat-seeking missile. It locks on to Zirnovic's hot engines and chases him down across the sky. Zirnovic, flying low, skims over some electrical transmission wires. The missile explodes near the wires and his tail, cutting part of his vertical stabilizer. But he's still flying. He reports the situation, but finds his radio completely dead. Alone and vulnerable, Zirnovic looks over his shoulder, expecting a second impact at any moment. But instead, he sees the F-16 turning away. Back with Mikhailovic, he and his wingman push their aircraft to their limits, racing through the valleys. But the F-16 relentlessly closes the distance. sky to catch a glimpse of an enemy fighter when the missile flies in and disintegrates his wingman. The Astra explodes into flame and scrap. He breaks into evasive maneuvers once again as the F-16 fires another missile. It slams straight into his engines. The explosion shreds the fuselage and flames pour out of the holes. He wrestles the dying aircraft, pulling hard on the stick and willing it to ascend as it burns all around him. As flames engulf the cockpit, Mikhailovich pulls the canopy emergency handle and ejects. The F-16 roars past as Mikhailovich parachutes safely down. The F-16s continue towards the next pair of targets. They swap positions with the covering F-16 diving into action, armed with a fresh set of missiles. But their fuel is running low, and in a few minutes, they'll be forced to turn back.
Approaching bingo fuel. Two bandits trying to escape. Might be able to get one shot. Roger that.
South of the F-16 pair, Vukmirovich and his wingman, Goran Zaric, have been forced to hear their friends taken down one by one in rapid succession. Any hope they have is crushed by the sight of an F-16 appearing over the hills behind them. The pair break formation as the American jet sweeps in. With just enough fuel left to make it back, the F-16 gets low. Vukmirovich sees the missile launch off the rail and turn toward him. He turns hard, trying to outmaneuver it. But it's no use. It rapidly approaches from his right and explodes just off his wing. He's stunned, but the fragmentation does no significant damage. He looks back, expecting more, but instead, the F-16 pulls off the chase, out of fuel. But NATO command has dispatched 2 more F-16s. Mirovich looks back up. The 2 J-21s scramble for speed, diving down as far as they dare into the valleys. They skim the treetops, racing between the hills, with the F-16s all the while shadowing them and keeping up. They look over their shoulders to see the F-16s closing the gap. There's nothing they can do to come out on top. In desperation, Vukmirovich tries a last-ditch idea. He turns straight towards a cliff at maximum speed, Zaric keeping close formation behind him. His heart races as the 2 jets head straight towards the Earth. The 2 pilots pull their controls as hard as they can. Zaric is crushed down by the G-forces as the ground rapidly approaches his windshield. Vukmirovich's jet clips the ground and bursts into flames. Zaric looks back. There's no parachute.
There!
The F-16s burst through the smoke, still in pursuit. He pulls back into a dive, rushing to use the terrain as cover. But they're far too close.
Box 2.
The missile closes the gap and explodes into Zaric's tail. His fighter bursts into flames, and he loses all control. He releases the canopy and ejects, but he's far too low. The parachute has no time to open, and he falls into the fireball of his own crashed jet.
Splash 1. There's another bandit on the radar. Engaging.
The F-16s leave the scene and catch up to another J-21 flying low over the countryside. It's Cernlich, limping his damaged jet home to safety. He's keeping an eye on his gauges when an F-16 roars past. He's filled with dread and immediately pulls on the stick. His only plan is to gain enough altitude to eject before the American can finish him off. The F-16 gets behind him and snappy emergency handle. But then, the F-16 pulls up alongside, matching his speed. He locks eyes with the enemy pilot. The American salutes him and flies away. Out of the 6 Yastreb pilots that volunteered for that dangerous mission, 3 never returned home. Sirnovich would later say, "I don't have any bad feelings towards the American pilots." This event is usually referred to as the Banja Luka incident and represents the first NATO combat engagement in its history. Robert Wilbur Wright was credited with 3 victories, the highest score by a USAF pilot in a single mission since the Korean War, while pilot Stephen Yogi Allen
19岁就找到了一种赚快钱的方法，他故意从大叔的
翻遍上下5000年，为什么说真正动过中国出厂设置的人只有2个，而嬴政是头一个？你说嬴政牛在统一6国，那成吉思汗打下的地盘够不够大？人家半个地球都踩在脚底下了。但蒙古帝国碎了就是碎了，碎的渣都不剩。嬴政的秦朝也碎了，项羽烧了他的宫殿，刘邦骂着他的暴政做了天下。按理说秦的一切都该跟着进坟。诡异的事情来了，刘邦赢了天下之后，试过分封，试过走回头路，结果7国之乱差点把大汉当场干报废，最后怎么着？灰溜溜把嬴政那套制度又捡了回来，一个字儿没敢改。你想想这件事有多邪门？一群人拼了命推翻一个暴君，坐下来一看，发现离了这个暴君定的规矩，天下就转不动。你以为这就完了？往后看，隋朝秦制、唐朝秦制、宋朝秦制，朱元璋杀人杀到手软，把前朝恨到骨头里。你猜他自己用的什么？基本上还是秦制。连清朝一群关外来的人骑着马进了中原，最后也老老实实套上了嬴政那件衣服。谭嗣同曾说了句大实话：2000年来之政，秦政也。换句话说，虽然他的王朝只活了15年，但15年够了，因为他不是建了一个王朝，他是给这片土地装了一个再也卸不掉的系统。虽然2000年后有个人把这件事做到了嬴政想都不敢想的程度，但那是后话了。所以今天我们就来聊聊嬴政这套系统到底是怎么让中国无论怎么碎、怎么乱、怎么亡，最后都会自己重新长回同一个形状的。而要理解这套系统为什么这么顽强，我们得先明白一个反常识的事实：在人类历史上，大帝国的常见结局不是传承，而是碎裂。罗马帝国崩解之后，欧洲再也没有自然长回一个统一帝国。奥斯曼帝国解体之后，中东直到今天还在承受碎片化的后果。帝国这东西，很多时候就像被外力压在一起的一堆碎片，压力一松，立刻弹回原状。那中国为什么不一样？当然，这里面不只是一个人的功劳，但这个起点就在嬴政。他在那短短的15年里，至少动了3刀，每一刀都切在了这片大陆的骨头上。第一刀杀死文字，这不是禁止说话，而是比禁止说话狠1万倍的事儿。他让几亿人的后代只能用同一套符号思考。统一之前，列国文字虽同源，但字形、书写习惯、文书系统差异都不小。比如马这个字儿，7国有7种写法，文字不通意味着什么？意味着把7块地图拼在一起，那也只是拼图，不是国家。当所有人的后代用同一套字读书、记账、写家信，一件不可逆的事儿就发生了。他们开始共享同一份记忆，从此这片土地可以容纳1000种方言，但永远不会像欧洲一样碎成几10个国家，因为嘴说的可以不一样，手写的必须一样，比嘴更深的决定了你属于哪个文明。第二刀杀死贵族，不是砍脑袋，是把贵族这个物种的生存土壤慢慢的连根铲掉。嬴政之前，天下怎么管？分封，天子把地分给儿子功臣，世世代代镇守，听着挺好。可世代这2个字就是定时炸弹，第1代是亲兄弟，第3代是远房亲戚，第5代跟陌生人有什么区别？凭什么我挣的钱分你一半？周朝就这么碎的，前100年兄友弟恭，后几百年杀成了人间地狱。嬴政看穿了血缘，他的解法极其残暴，1寸地都不封，36郡，郡下设县，所有官员全是朝廷委派的打工人。这块地不是你的，这把椅子不是你的，你的权利来自咸阳，一纸调令，说撤就撤，说滚就滚。这意味着地方上再也长不出土皇帝了。但最要命的不是效率，是这套制度藏着一个自愈功能。郡县制下，任何割据都天然不合法，哪怕天下大乱，所有人心里都清楚，你称王称霸